we do have our quorum and people who knew was coming.
Yeah.
So, before I get us actually into things, I want to introduce everyone. We have Tess here as our new commissioner for District D, so that's Minneapolis and a couple of things hanging off the edge of it. So that was the district that was vacated by Asada Brown. So, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to say one thing about yourself? I'm just thinking
Oh,
something
man.
like burger or your...
Yeah, I'm here because I'm a bird lover, essentially, I guess. And I love the Twin Cities. I'm really excited to participate in any way that I can to maintain all of the beauty that has been maintained in the past.
That's great. You'll fit with it.
Now, are you like the casual kind of bird lover where like, oh, that's a cool bird, or are you kind of like you have a lifetime list?
There is a list. I don't know if I call it a lifetime list, but I am a casual birder too. I think I love birds in general. But if there is something exciting, I'll get excited.
Okay. I have an aunt that's the type of we need to go drive 3 hours because a rare bird was spotted somewhere.
I did drive recently to see the sandhill crane migration, which I would highly recommend everybody to do. It's incredible. Really beautiful. They're amazing birds. So I have driven to see birds.
Okay.
Were you down in Nebraska for that?
Yes.
Nice.
That does sound fun.
So what's your favorite local park, regional park?
Well, I grew up in the Uptown area,
Okay.
so Lake Harriet and Roberts Park right there, and the cemetery, I'll say, is a great place to watch birds. There's an affiliated woodpecker pair that lives there that's fun to see. And so I grew up in that area.
Okay, great.
Oh yeah. Next, when we were talking about long range planning, I remember that birding spot being mentioned in a long range plan that
Oh,
we
really?
saw like 6 years ago.
Yeah,
Okay.
because they have those.
Oh.
All right, so first up then is approval of our agenda. We just do this by kind of a consent. Is there anything that needs to be added or changed on our agenda? All right, hearing none, our agenda can be approved. We'll move on to approval of the February commission minutes. They're included in your packet. We'll take a motion and second from anyone who was present at that meeting.
I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion from Monica. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Cecily, thank you. Are there any corrections to those minutes? All right, hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved, thank you. That brings us to the public invitation portion of our meeting for interested persons to address the commission, generally on items not on our agenda. Did we have anyone that had expressed interest in addressing us today?
Not today, Chair.
All right, and keep moving. Our one business item of the day is the appointment of a vice chair for the commission for the year. Which I guess I actually have to kind of read. This just calls for designating someone to chair the meetings in my absence if there is a meeting that I'm not able to attend. So I am bringing the proposed action, so I can actually say that I'll move it as well. I'll move that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission approve the appointment of Monica Dilleberg as the commission's vice chair for 2023.
Second.
Second from Bob, thank you. So yeah, it's kind of a rotating thing around for your benefit, kind of pick someone each year. It was Cecily last year, and spoke to Monica earlier this week, and she agreed to cover that. That's kind of all there is to it. It's just anytime I'm not able to be here.
With you will be.
Yeah. So, is there any discussion of that motion?
You will be here, so that's discussion.
All right. Okay, all in favor of the appointment of Monica, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you for volunteering.
Thanks.
So then the other stuff on our agenda today is what we call information items. These are things where we aren't taking a formal action, but rather they're being presented both for us to get information from staff and for us to give feedback to staff. So this is in the development of Parks Policy Plan stuff, trying to figure out what should go into some early drafts of that. So for, that's the second two of them. And then our first one is, as Emmett was telling about earlier, the Three Rivers Park District's Parks to People Plan, status update, and let us know a bit about that. This is what we're calling our equity nudge as part of our focus on equity. Kind of each month we have something that somehow relates to our equity focus, so that it kind of stays front of our minds and to see what we can do about it. So with that, Colin, and introduce yourself for our record as well. We have two names on here, one person here, so go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Good afternoon. I'm Colin Kelly, as the Chair stated. I'm here to introduce our first information item, an equity nudge. And Rexine, Principal Planner with Three Rivers Park District, will present information on the agency's Parks to People Plan. And Jonathan Blaming, Associate Superintendent, is also here for questions and discussion. The Parks to People Plan is a long-range planning process that will help Three Rivers define and unify park and recreation services for Hennepin County's first-tier communities. The plan's primary goal is to identify opportunities for new bridging facilities, a new kind of special recreation feature for the regional park system. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ann.
Thanks, Colin. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Happy to be here. Again, my name is Ann Rexine, and I serve as the Principal Planner for Three Rivers Park District. And we've been working on this initiative for the past 2 years, and we're entering year 3. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to come before you, so thank you for the invitation to come and discuss our plan with you. So if you could forward to the next slide.
There you go.
Oh, I have
You have the power.
the control. This one. Do I point it somewhere?
In theory.
Okay.
Oh.
Oh.
There we go.
New battery.
I'm hoping it works, but I'll just bring this over. Okay.
Oh, now it's working. Great.
Perfect.
Okay. So, as Colin stated, the Met Council is part of the Regional Policy Plan update, defined a new classification for regional parks called bridging facilities. And this was really to capture the first ring suburbs for Three Rivers Park District of Minneapolis, which includes 11 cities on the western edge of Minneapolis. And it really allowed us to think broader about how we bring regional park facilities to those 11 first-tier communities in a way that we haven't done it before. So as the slide says up here, our vision for specifically Three Rivers to define this bridging facilities definition is to connect those first-tier suburbs to nature every day. And one way to do that is to physically bring parks to people, and that's why we've called this plan the Parks to People Plan. Our principal goal for this plan is to identify new bridging initiatives, and those can take the form of physical parks or programs, but they must be in concert with our mission, which is to promote environmental stewardship through recreation and education in a natural resources-based park system. Next, oh, I was gonna say next slide. Our audience is the 11 first-tier communities, and this map shows the focused geography. So it includes Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, New Hope, Crystal, Robbinsdale, Golden Valley, St. Louis Park, Hopkins, Edina, Richfield, and Bloomington. And we've been specific to take Brooklyn Park south of 610 and Bloomington east of 35. So that's our focused geography. And then within that, we have a focused audience. So within those 11 first-tier communities, we're specifically hoping to get community feedback from our BIPOC community members, those households who are making less than $50,000 or less per year, our older generation, 75 plus, and individuals with a range of abilities, and new immigrants and refugees. So we have been, throughout the past 2 years, continuing to engage all of those 11 cities, whether it be city managers, park directors, community outreach staff, to get a better understanding of what their needs are, what gaps in the system there might be, and to guide our community engagement process. So these definitions are specific for Three Rivers. So over the course of these past 2 years, we started in 2021, we had a common understanding for Three Rivers, because bridging facilities, when we went to folks and said, we want to create bridging facilities, they often looked at us kind of with a blank stare, like, what is that? You know, tell us more about it. And so we really had to come up with some definitions for what that really means for folks. So we have had this definitions for us developed, which includes bridging parks, which are physical standalone sites that are nature-based offerings. So that could include something like a Sohaki Park for us. Or they could be bridging programs, which are mobile recreation offerings and nature-based education and events. And this is consistent with the Regional Parks Policy Plan document itself. Within the programs, we have better understood that they will take some individualized, specialized support facilities that assist in the delivery of those programs, whether it be, you know, a mobile RV that is a weather shelter for children when they're at a park, that we're performing those, or we're delivering those bridging programs for, etc. So in most cases, this will not be something that Three Rivers does on our own. It will be in partnership with cities, agencies, schools, nonprofits, folks that are already delivering recreational programs and community groups. So I mentioned we've been conducting community engagement for the past 2 years, and so we've broken it out into these 3 different phases. So in 2021, we were fortunate enough to have the help of a Pathways intern, which is through our Three Rivers program, help us deliver this voting activity that you can see on the right there. It was a fun, colorful engagement. We went to over 42 different sites. We went to where the people were, and we collected engagement from over 2,000 people in county. So we're still conducting this, this engagement on an as-needed basis, but we were really interested to hear what people are looking for. So in these pockets, you could put your popsicle stick in one of the activities that you wanted to try, and then the popsicle sticks were associated to the barriers why you haven't participated yet, whether that be transportation, you didn't know about us, you don't have equipment to try, and so again, that was 2021. So that was our preliminary input. And then last year, we went to do a deeper dive. We wanted a deeper understanding, so we received a Hennepin County SHIP grant through their health program, health initiatives program, and we conducted 16 focus groups. We were fortunate enough to hire community facilitators, which represented these groups that you see listed here, and we engaged with over 185 people in county. We're still conducting focus groups here into 2023 as well. And then this year, we were fortunate enough to receive an additional Hennepin County SHIP grant, and we are hiring again 4 community facilitators who will pilot those ideas. So we're actually putting those ideas into action, and so each of those 4 community facilitators will develop 3 events during the summer. So if we're hearing things from the community that they'd like to try a specific activity, we're actually putting it into practice and going out and doing those things this summer. So what we've learned from our engagement so far is that there's strong interest in Three Rivers. You know, people that don't know about us are super jazzed when they hear about all the things that we offer. But those that aren't participating in Three Rivers aren't participating because often they don't have the equipment. That's expensive or intimidating for beginners. So you say, have you ever tried cross-country skiing? Oh my gosh, why would I want to try that? Because it's a big commitment. I don't know if I'm going to like it, and you know, why would I try that? Maybe they're thinking that Three Rivers isn't convenient to them because we're not located within these physical communities that we're representing. And the last is some of them aren't even aware that Three Rivers exists, or they're not connecting the dots that Three Rivers provides a regional recreation opportunities. But the Parks to People plan aims to fill those gaps. So our next steps, we're entering year 3, and I have a timeline on the next slide that shows this whole project over the course of 3 years and where we're headed. But the highlights of the next steps is to really better understand what those community engagement themes are and how they're going to impact those recommendations. And then the next bullet is really critical. It's going to be assessing those bridging facilities based on an equity prioritization tool. And so this uses Hennepin County climate vulnerability assessment data. So we're actually using GIS data to run a gap analysis and a suitability for sites based on known sites that we already know and unknown sites that might not have come up on our radar yet. So it's going to be data driven, and so we're going to identify those opportunities, and then we're going to create the framework for the physical plan for identifying the bridging parks and programs and the supporting projects. And then lastly, we're going to develop the prioritization, budgets, and strategies to implement these projects. So that's really the meat of the project itself. Our timeline, this shows where we've gone. So 1, 2, 3 have been those last couple of years of engagement, and 4 is where we're at today. So we're really getting into the heart of the program, or the plan, excuse me, where we're looking at those engagement themes, we're making recommendations, we're going back to the cities and saying, what do you think? This is what we're hearing. What do you think? Can we move forward with it? And developing the physical plan this year, and we'll be back in front of you folks probably later this winter and early 2024. We're really thinking that this plan needs to be flexible. It's a new initiative. It's never been done before within our agency and Met Council. It's a new definition for regional parks. And so we are sort of the first frontier folks that are doing this initiative. So, our plan will look for flexibility, and we'll look for a new approach to how we actually implement these types of facilities for our first year members. So with that, I'll stand for questions. Jonathan Flaming is here today too to answer questions. Our contact information is up here. And I've also included Maggie Heurung, who's also our associate planner. She has been the forefront of the community engagement effort for the past 2 years, going into this 3rd year. So with that, I stand for questions.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try to do a very quick summary of what we're talking about for what you haven't heard already. In terms of the policy plan, several years back, we had a time saying, in these, recognizing both the fact that we have some places where there just isn't the land mass available for parks to be built at this point, and also what we were talking about, trying to get people that have been underserved in. How do we do that? We identified this completely new category of unit type that we call bridging facilities, and gave some general parameters of what that might be, but it doesn't, none of them exist yet. Three Rivers is kind of the first one to come to us and say, based on what you told us about what your goals are, we're working on some ideas of what that might actually look like. Mm-hmm. So we're hearing for the first time what the implementation might be of some fairly vague ideas we threw out there of this new thing to try to get people connected. So that's what we're hearing about.
Thank you, Jay.
Yes, Cecily.
Well, thanks for doing this. It's pretty exciting. It's funny, when I retired from parks in 2018, we would tell people that really all you need to go to a park is a pair of tennis shoes, a water bottle, and maybe a hat. So, it's, to me it makes it kind of sad that people think they need all kinds of expensive equipment and such to go to parks, when really you just need a pair of shoes, and appropriate clothing. So I hope, some of those messages get out there too, that it's not all about active recreation. But what I saw in these slides has a lot of great pictures of young kids. And one of the groups you were talking about is seniors 75 and up. What are you doing for them? How will you bring them to parks?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair and Commissioners. Last year we had our community facilitators who were in charge of focus groups, and we had a woman named Monica who was specific to our senior community. And so, not you much. And so we had 4 focus groups specific to seniors. We held them at St. Therese in New Hope, and a church in Brooklyn Park, amongst several other locations. And so we are receiving feedback. Well, you might not have seen it in the pictures per se, but we are receiving feedback from all different demographics.
But for those senior populations, are they in the category of don't know about Three Rivers, or I've never been to any of the parks? Or are they more, they can't get there, or at their stage in life, they don't know what to do in the park?
Chair and Commissioners, those groups are not mutually exclusive of each other. So you could be a senior and you could also be a member of our BIPOC community, right? So we're hearing from all different types of seniors as well. And I will say some demographics know of Three Rivers, absolutely, and they've taken their children to Three Rivers, and now they've taken their grandchildren, right? And they're just progressing into their next phase of life. So they're looking for different types of recreation, more passive recreation versus active recreation. So they're very interested in walking and staying fit. And so, yeah, we are hearing that type of feedback. I'm sorry, what was your question again, specifically?
Well, just how would you be targeting seniors? 75 and up, as opposed to, all these other communities that you're targeting?
It is very much about staying fit. It's very much about walking. It's very much about ADA accessibility. It's very much about walkable surfaces that are cleared of snow in the wintertime. It's making the place feel safe for them, making sure that it's welcoming for all ages. A lot of the programming thoughts that we're hearing are multi-generational programming that folks are looking for. So not only are you learning something, but your children or your grandchildren, you can all attend them together. So yeah, absolutely, we're hearing that type of feedback.
Thank you. Yes, Bob.
Commissioner and is that correct? I like it. I like it a lot. This is a terrific moving forward, I think. I'm curious, obviously, Met Council would probably be a significant funder, but do you foresee getting the cities to have skin in the game in this as well, that they would participate from a cost sharing standpoint, or do you see this all as being part of a Met Council grant?
Jonathan's looking crazy.
Sure, I'll jump in on this. Hi, I'm Jonathan Blaming, the Associate Superintendent for Planning and Design and all things money. First off, when it comes to funding this program, first I want to state that I went into this thinking it was more about physical location and facilities, and what Ann and her team has learned is really more about programming and bringing programming into the first-ring suburbs to where people live, and to help them learn about the environment, learn about birding, learn how to do outdoor recreation activities, do activities in parks, and then transitioning that from the local park into the regional park through the use of ambassador programs and through working with our partners, bringing those in. So it's a really kind of odd mix that is, when it comes to funding, it's like, how do you do that? The obvious funding stream that can be tapped, and one of the few that can be tapped at a regional or state level are the legacy dollars to do that. The other funding streams that typically flow through the Met Council can't be used for programmatic type things. We're not sure if we're going to tap into legacy to fund this, simply because there's headaches when you use legacy funds for funding personnel and staff. So we may end up just funding it all ourselves. With regards to the partners, we're bringing a regional service to our partners, and historically when we bring regional services, we don't ask the partners to help pay for it. Regional trails are an excellent example. When we build a regional trail, we do not ask for the local communities to help pay to build that regional trail. That's our responsibility as a regional agency. In this case, I can see partnering with the cities and getting their help in getting these programs organized and to host them through their facilities, or in some cases, we'll have to build a facility specific to that education opportunity. But we wouldn't ask them to cost share on the cost of the programmatic elements. At least we're not planning to at this time.
Yes, Sue.
I apologize for being late. I was involved in another discussion, but I represent the Met Council on the Governor's Task Force for an Age-Friendly Minnesota, and they have been working for the last 4 years. They've been working for years on Minnesota becoming an age-friendly state and working with communities, counties, townships on their age-friendly status. They have a grant program, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that and see whether there are grants available to help you with your engagement activities. They're looking for all sorts of innovative ideas, and they're getting a lot of applicants, but I think this one would be of particular interest because the whole wellness, well-being factor is a big one.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I could add to that.
Cecily then Bob.
So that triggers something else in my mind. I would also look at, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, all the various medical foundations, because they're doing the same thing, trying to, support the health of their insurance recipients.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Mr. Chair. Jonathan, just a sense that in the funding of things, some skin in the game seems to add to the ownership of what's going on. And so I guess I'm just, as you're moving along with this stuff, I would ask you to just consider, is there any benefit to asking them to pay even a small portion of what you're doing to add some skin and interest in the game? That's all.
I'm not sure if you know, the city of Brooklyn Park has a program called Rec on the Go, which is 2 minivans that they use. And since the city of Brooklyn Park is one of the tier cities, I hope you work together with them. So as for that reason, I also, why is only south of 610?
Yes, Chair and Commissioners, our demographic analysis of our targeted underrepresented population groups identified those populations south of 610 that had a greater need than those of north of 610 that were served by Mississippi Gateway Regional Park in Brooklyn Park and by Elm Creek in Maple Grove.
Yes, well, I asked because most of the programming in the city of Brooklyn Park is also south of 610, and according to our awesome map in the Metropolitan system, we have a whole bunch of people up north of 610, and there are also new housing going there that I know they're gonna need something. So I understand the theory and I can see it in my neighborhood. It's very obvious sometimes, but it would be nice to see, a little action going on the 610, especially now with, the Mississippi Getaway Park. The project is awesome, and it would be nice to use it. And I like this program. I really like it. My only concern would be, how do we get the people there once you teach them how to do it? Like I just last weekend went with a church in Crystal that they took some of the youth ministers to ski in Highland. and it was great, and the kids love it, and the church is the one who pays transportation, the parents help half of the, the rental fee or whatever. And when you do it like that, they have coupons that I noticed, so it's great. If they know about it, they might be able to bring their kids. And down skiing is so scary, but at the end they will all going up and down there. The problem is, how are they gonna go back there or go to Elm Creek, because transportation is a problem. So your work should be, think about that.
Yes, absolutely, Chair and Commissioners, if I would able to address
Yes.
that. We're hearing that. Yeah, absolutely. We're hearing that they need a warm handoff.
Yeah.
They need someone, if you're interested in visiting one of our parks, they need to hear it from a trusted resource and a trusted member of the community. And so we are looking at unique and creative, innovative ways to train the trainer. Maybe there's ways that we can bring those folks into the Three Rivers fold and bring them to actively take their network to our parks. And we're already doing that through our community outreach and our community engagement teams. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that comment.
That's great. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to say I really enjoy the use of the pictures for your overview and next step slides, where it's bringing wildlife in somewhere else. 'Cause part of it, since this is all new, we're going, what is this bridging facility idea going to be? And the title also, the parks to people, trying to figure out how you bring the park. And this idea of actually being able to have plants and animals transported into places that might not have them anymore. Like, okay, this is what we're talking about. Because yeah, if you just have a facility and they come, like, okay, what are you going to do there? But the idea of being able to bring stuff, like this is what you'll find out there, not only just in the activities, but in terms of the actual nature. That's really cool. I know in terms of live animals, I'm sure that's got to be interesting from a staffing logistics perspective, but the more you can do it, the cooler it is. Good on you for that. So that part excites me, to try to figure out what these facilities and programming would even mean, but trying to figure out how you bring that outdoors to somewhere that doesn't have it anymore because it's developed is what's interesting for me to see how you accomplish that.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
If I may add one more comment. And Ann already touched on this, but I want to reiterate it. This is an experimental approach, and we're sort of testing it as we're going into the fourth stage and the fifth stage. We are engaging Amanda Lovely from my council staff as our point person on this, and so she'll be involved in this. But I want to reiterate that the master plan that's going to come out of this isn't going to fit with the master plan requirements, so to speak, of that are outlined in the policy plan. It doesn't work that way. That one has a natural resources chapter. We're hoping to have chapters on the different kinds and different kinds of facilities, different kinds of programs and things like that. So please be flexible with us in this plan and understand that to follow strictly the policy plan and the guidelines for master plans on that would make this almost an impossible task. We'd end up creating many, many, many thick documents, and we'd be spending all of our time on that instead of actually trying to figure out the puzzle and to get to the solution. So.
It's a good point, and I don't know yet what all that might look like, so it might be good for us to get some sort of an intermediate step of a more fleshing out of these are what those challenges would be, because we've never seen this before, you've never seen that before.
Yeah,
for the commissioners that aren't involved in that step of the development of things, some kind of an explanation to us of this is why it doesn't fit and how and what we think we're going to try to do instead. It's just so what I'm saying is it might be good for us to get something before we get to the step of actually having the plan on our agenda as a business item, so we know what to expect. This one's kind of weird, and here's why. Because yeah, this is new and different, and We hadn't fleshed out that part of when we did the policy plan update to say, here's a new unit type. We never addressed the question of how does that change all the other cascading planning documents. Yes, Emmett?
Chair and Commissioners, we're happy to work with Three Rivers on this. We're super excited about the arrival of this plan, and we know it isn't your typical, planning effort. So it would be great, and I'll take you up on that suggestion to sort of sit down, like I think our planning teams can come together on this and just sort of figure out and negotiate out what we'll need to see in order to bring that to you, and we can bring you something in the interim.
Yeah, and I don't even know, maybe it's an information item on a meeting, maybe it's just a briefing document emailed out, just so we kind of know what's happening. Could go kind of either way depending on what's in there.
So is there not a category of programmatic master plan then? Is it all capital master plans
We have acquisition and development.
and development?
We don't have a plan in our steps for programming. It frequently gets mentioned in the development, like I was explaining to Tess earlier before you got here. The development plans frequently refer to some of the kinds of programming they'll have to explain why they're building the facilities they are. But we don't get a plan for that because the programming itself is outside of our direct jurisdiction, so we don't have
So it sounds like there might be a need for one, Emmett.
Something to discuss.
It's complicated. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Looking forward to
Nice.
seeing what
Nice
comes
to
of
see
this.
you. Thank you. We'll look into that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Let me know if I can help in any way.
Thank you so much.
All right. So next up, we're getting into the 2050 Regional Development Guide and the Regional Parks Policy Plan, stuff coming from that. We have various staff. Go ahead and feel free, since we do have a new commissioner, to give a little extra background and explanation on things if you feel like it's helpful.
Well, I'm going to kick us off today, Chair and Commissioners. We're really excited to bring in Tess Boschka. Close. Okay, as our new commissioner. And thanks, Chair, also for suggesting a little bit more context. So we are just kicking off and getting into this big 10-year planning cycle, the 2050 Regional Development Guide. And I'm here today with my colleagues, Chee Yang and Colin Kelly, to give you a little overview of where we're at, because we've made, and the council has made some exciting progress in this work. So the purpose of this discussion is really just to give you a sense for where we are and where we're headed. We want to set the stage also for the next item on the agenda. We have Dan Markell here to talk about the Regional Development Guide and Scenario Planning. And this is a big push to improve and better integrate how we integrate our council systems, including the transit system, the wastewater system, the housing system, and most importantly, the park system. That's today. So I'll go to our next slide. Here's what we're going to cover, our little outline. We'll start with an update on the Regional Development Guide, and we'll share progress that the council, Sue, and her colleagues have made on the articulation of a draft regional vision and values. Next, we'll get into the Parks Policy Plan, giving you a sense for what we've been up to in our timeline and approach again. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear your advice and your questions for moving forward. But first, everyone's favorite topic, terminology. Is that right? Is that where we are? I think so. So values. There's just three of them. So the values are core beliefs or principles that guide the work of the council, our expectations of partnerships, and our policy and program development. Next, we have our vision. Our vision is what we want to achieve, where
we want to go for the region. I think that's the emphasis. Not just the council, but the idea is that this is a regional plan through our policies, practices, programs, and partnerships. And finally, our goals. And our goals broadly describe that desired end state, what we want to accomplish. So that's the terminology. So sorry to get, I think they say pedantic, but now we want to go to the actual content behind it. And this is, again, with the council has a working draft. And Sue, if you want to add color commentary here, please just jump in.
Okay.
First, and this probably won't be a big surprise, but out of the gates, we want to identify equity as a value, that we value the people and communities of our region. Next, we have leadership. We value those in our region who inspire and motivate others for positive change. Thirdly, accountability. We value being effective in our work and achieving measurable outcomes. And then finally, stewardship. And we value our region's abundant resources. Those are the sort of four working values that I'm really excited about. I hope they resonate with you. And the next is our regional vision. And again, there are four main elements to our regional vision. These have slowly emerged. It's been a really interesting process to kind of watch. Mike Larson came to the commission and presented. So I think what you're going to see is an evolution from what he presented a few months ago. First, our region is equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. So that's the first dimension of it. There's a little bit more to it, but I'm not going to read to you. Next, our communities are healthy, safe, and vibrant. Thirdly, we lead on addressing climate change. And finally, we protect and restore natural systems. And while these four vision elements don't get specifically into a policy area in detail, it's clear to us that the regional park system intersects with all four of these really clearly. So I'm really, personally excited about this because I think that there's such a nice bridge from these into our regional park system work. So this is my last slide. As you may know, state law requires that we do this. This is one of the functions of the Metropolitan Council, that we do a regional development guide. Additionally, that we do a subcomponent of that, which is our regional parks policy plan. In the past, I may have been guilty of thinking this as a standalone document, but the idea is that these system plans nest under that larger regional development guide vision. We last updated the parks policy in December of 2020, and this project will update key components of our parks policy plan, so this really will be something to discuss, Cecily, as I think you were suggesting in one of your last comments, and will involve coordination with other council policy areas during the development. Significant internal and external engagement is planned, and actually it's already started. I mean, I think about what we've talked about already with you, like this is part of it. We've received really helpful guidance from you on this effort. We've received a lot of helpful guidance from our park agency partners on both the regional values and vision. We've initiated council agency work groups to build off this engagement, and completion of the regional development guide, including the parks policy plan component, is expected toward the end of next year. That's about where we are. So it's a long process, but it's a robust process too. I'm going to turn this over to Colin Kelly, who will continue.
Thanks, Emmett. Good afternoon. Once again, Mr. Chair, Council Member, and Commissioners. I'm here to share an updated project timeline with you, and then Chee and I are going to share a proposed approach for this work over the next year or so. So as you can see before you, the project timeline can be broken down into kind of 4 main components or phases that you can see at the top of this graphic: initiation, planning, execution, and close. We're currently in the first phase, initiation, but we're kind of getting near the end of that one, kind of nearing the beginning of planning. Initiation includes scoping, reviewing existing conditions, and the start of a process to draft vision, mission, and value statements, and an engagement plan for the policy plan update process. This work will continue through the spring and transitions into the second phase in early summer of this year. In the second phase, planning will continue to roll out a series of council implementing agency work groups that will focus on areas of identified interest and need. More on those work groups in just a minute. Policy development is a key aspect of this phase, starting this summer and continuing into next winter. Before we go too far down the road to the right, I'd like to point out the 2 bars that exist at the bottom of this graphic. These extend throughout the process. The green bar shows that we'll be coordinating with the Regional Development Guide folks throughout this process. The gray bar shows that the engagement with key groups such as yourself, regional park implementing agencies, and others will occur throughout the process as well. Moving back up to the phases on the top, execution represents the 3rd phase and will occur between next winter and summer of 2024. That's when we take all of the work that we do this year and craft the product or products that will ultimately make up the Regional Development Guide and the Parks Policy Plan. An important milestone in this phase is a draft 60% plan, currently targeted for spring 2024. So a little bit more than a year from now. The 4th and final phase is close, where we'll share the final draft, or what we call 90% plan, and there will be a public comment period, a public hearing, and those will be for the entire Regional Development Guide, including the Regional Parks Policy Plan. After needed refinements, the Regional Development Guide is targeted for council approval late next year, around November, we think. Okay, so like I said, over the next year or so, our proposed approach to updating the Regional Parks Policy Plan focuses on a set of 7 council agency work groups, starting with the first 2 work groups that you see listed here. The other 5 work groups will likely ramp up later this spring or early this summer. These work groups were intentionally formed around and directly connected to the major themes of input provided by you and the 10 regional park implementing agencies last fall. Those groups include community engagement, regional parks and trails system vision and values, strategic sustainable funding, recreation activities and facilities, park and trail plan requirements, including the equity analysis requirement, system plan considerations, including the recreation opportunity spectrum, and regional trails, and the regional bicycle transportation network. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chee to talk a little bit about the first work group listed here.
Thanks, Colin. So as mentioned, the Community Engagement Group is one of the first 2 subgroups to convene. The goal is to develop a meaningful and transparent engagement plan to help guide us as we engage communities, stakeholders, and the public. The plan will provide an engagement timeline and additional information that's related to the Regional Parks Policy Plan update, and it will include any information related to any coordinated engagement efforts with the Regional Development Guide and any other council divisions. Currently, Parks and Communications staff are developing a draft engagement plan. So this draft will be shared with this subgroup for review and update. For next steps, council and agency staff plan to meet at least twice by the end of April to collaborate on engagement planning efforts. If the commissioners and council member have any recommendations or guidance for us as we begin to kick off our engagement, please do share that with us at the end of the presentation. Now I'll hand it back to Colin and he'll highlight the next subgroup.
Thanks, Chee. So this is the second of the 2 work groups we had listed the slide before last that will be convening soon, likely at the end of this month or the beginning of next, which is April. The goal of this work group is to develop vision and mission statements and a set of values for the regional parks and trails system that will help guide policy plan development and embody what we want to achieve for the system through our policies, practices, programs, and partnerships. It's a lot of P's. So far, Council Park staff have compiled and begun to analyze the results of the fall surveys taken by agencies and yourself, as well as input from Council staff. Now we intend to take this work to the next level and have invited agency staff to the table to develop a set of options for consideration by the Regional Park Implementing Agency Partnership in late May. Council Park staff aim to return to the Commission in June or July to share the results of this work, and we can work with Emmett on scheduling our next visit. A little bit more about vision, mission, and values. And this is our final slide before we move into questions and discussion. First off, a disclaimer. The content on this slide is really meant to illustrate a process for developing vision, mission, and values. And it's less about reading all of the content on this slide. So if you can't read everything here, that's okay. That's not really the point of this slide. Allow me to explain. The 3 items that appear on the far left side of the slide represent the initial input provided by Council staff, regional park implementing agencies, and you in relation to vision statements. What this part of the graphic represents is a whole lot of really good quote-unquote raw material to start the process. From that input, Council staff have done some basic analysis to highlight words that were used most often in responses to help us understand what you and others value about the regional parks and trail system. That's what those 2 boxes, starting with vision and values, represent. Continuing to the right, you see 2 boxes with the headers, values, and cross-cutting regional vision. In a slightly different form, these are the values and vision statements that Emmett shared earlier that have emerged out of the Regional Development Guide process. These statements will need to be taken into consideration in our process as well. Fortunately, there is a lot of alignment between what's coming out of the Regional Development Guide process and early thoughts that you and the implementing agencies have shared with us. The complex machine graphic you see after that is where the magic really happens. This is really meant to be a proxy for the vision, mission, and values work group. They're going to take all of the input provided, consider the words and phrases that resonate the most, weigh that alongside the values and vision coming out of the Regional Development Guide process, and create a draft set of vision, mission, and value statements for the Regional Parks and Trails system. Those draft statements will then be shared with and reviewed by the broader Regional Park Implementing Agency Partnership and you, and will later be a part of additional stakeholder and public comment opportunities. The last 2 graphics represent a final polished product that, for this organization, captures the key elements in colorful visuals that succinctly communicate vision, mission, values, and strategic directions. So left to right then is a very simplified approach to the development of vision, mission, and values. It's meant to be considerate of input received previously and input that will be gathered now and into the future. It needs to be in alignment with and complement the Regional Development Guide statements. At the same time, it is an opportunity to highlight what makes regional parks and trails special and unique in a succinct, inspiring, and hopefully meaningful way. So with that, we want to move into some questions and some discussion, and we've got a couple of questions here for you to ponder. First, what are your questions about what you've heard so far? And second, do you have any policy level guidance or advice to share with council staff and the work groups getting underway. Thank you.
Potentially big questions. Cecily?
Always questions. Thank you for making this clear, what is going to happen in a complicated way. So will there, this is kind of a two-part question, and I have two big questions. So the 10 implementing agencies, will they be involved in all of the different subgroups, or is that based on what their interests are? And how will they engage the cities in their region? For example, I live in Washington County, and do we think they'll be reaching out to the cities that are near their regional parks and trails? That's question one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Harris, good question. We've asked the 10 implementing agencies to nominate or volunteer individuals to work groups that they feel align with their interests and expertise. And we've gotten a really good response so far. We don't have one person per implementing agency for each of the work groups so far. Right now, I think we've got 4 or 5 probably per work group. And really we're focused in on those first 2 work groups right now. But we intend to have an iterative process where the work groups, then sort of report back out to the overall partnership. And then there's an opportunity to go back to the work group and do some additional work as needed. We haven't fully articulated how cities might be involved in this process. So far, this focuses on those council agency work groups. There will be extensive external and internal engagement, like Emmett said before, and that's likely to involve local government units, state agencies, some of the federal agencies that exist in the Twin Cities, and others, watershed districts, and so on. So there is a plan to engage. We just haven't fully articulated how that process will work yet. But like Chee said, we want to work with other council divisions who might be engaging some of those same folks on similar policy and system-related topics as well.
Great. So I think you kind of answered my second question already. Whether you've started a list of the community groups, but it sounds like, local agencies might be some of the community groups and, state and federal as well. So thank you.
Sue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a specific question or any guidance or advice to give. I just want to thank you for mentioning the watershed districts. I was at a meeting Tuesday night convened by Freshwater and the Rice Creek Watershed District, focusing on climate change and the impact of climate change in that region of the metro area. It was an incredible start to a really important conversation. They're going to be continuing it later this month. But I'm glad that the watershed districts are being mentioned. And based on the turnout for the meeting I was at Tuesday, and it was a 4-hour meeting. I had to leave early because of another meeting, but I was really impressed with the enthusiasm. And it was city officials, school district officials, citizens, and you name it. It was a great broad mix of people, and the watershed districts play a really important role in all of this. And the concern about the aquifer is huge. Aquifers.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Bob.
Mr. Chair, Colin. We've worked on these plans now about every 5 years or so, and hopefully we're growing in our skill and our sensitivities. Have we learned things from the last time or two around that we can improve our process on, and what might those be?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mullin, it's a great question, and I have had the opportunity to be a part of the last update to the Regional Parks Policy Plan in 2020, and that was a more focused update to the Regional Parks Policy Plan. The scope of this one is broader in that we intend to focus on most all aspects of the Regional Parks Policy Plan, and there's a real interest in integration with the different policy areas and systems at the council. So it's a little bit of a different approach for me personally than it was for the 2020 update, in that there's a real interest amongst many in the council to have an integrated process amongst the different policies and systems, and a real interest in intentional engagement of a variety of communities, of a variety of stakeholders, and the public throughout this process. That's why we're devoting so much time over this next year in reaching out to different groups to gather input. I think we've learned a great deal over the last few years, but I might invite Emmett to speak to that as well, who has had additional experience in updating policy plans over time.
Thanks, Colin, and thanks, Commissioner Mullin. Great question. I think we are learning, and I think we are getting a little better at this. I can say, you know, having been at this for a few years, I've held a number of meetings in public libraries where, you know, no one really shows up. So the idea of meeting people where they are, and then also talking about what's on their mind rather than what's on my mind. So I think that those are sort of guiding approaches. One other thing that I think that we've learned is, Bob, as you said, we've been at this for a while, and like it feels like we were just doing this, is what you're probably saying to yourself. And maybe I am too. And we heard a lot, like during what Colin referenced, the 2020 update to the Regional Parks Policy Plan, and we learned a lot. And we don't think we fully, like, I think that we can sit with some of the things that we heard in 2020 and really still think about what does that suggest that we do differently or change. And so I think that we have a lot of material that is out there that we can take and bring into play during this planning effort. Because the other thing that Colin said is this is the more comprehensive update. This is the big, you know, regional development guide process. And the other efforts that I've been involved in have been more specifically targeted to the Regional Parks Policy Plan. So that's just a few.
Good, thanks, Emma. One of the things that strikes me that positively, I shouldn't say but strikes me policy is the integration, especially of the transportation plan. I mean, I think what we're doing and what the transportation folks are doing, the need to get some access, Monica, to your point, for people to be able to get to these different parks is a big deal. And I would think if we could do a better job of integrating some of that stuff and putting some money, if we need to, into a way of reaching the parks. I'm really very much in favor of that. The other thing, connecting with our implementing agencies as we go through this thing, to me is a really big deal. And I would just encourage you strongly to make sure that gets done and that we have an opportunity to hear them as the plans are being presented. We also have a chance to hear from them if there are serious disagreements with the plan, that we know that. If we're going to have to do some weighing of the scales, I want to be sure that we hear from the users as well as us. That's it.
Great suggestions, Bob. Thank you. And it makes me feel a little guilty because the Transportation Policy Plan recently reached out to me to provide an opportunity for comments. So what I'm going to do is basically provide them what you just said.
I just want to point out an obvious thing. On your initial work groups, you mentioned one for plan requirements, and we just heard from Jonathan that there might need to be some changes to plan requirements. So it's nice that those are going to be happening basically in parallel in the same kind of timeline, and we're going to want to make sure that we kind of cross-reference the two and say, okay, if there's problems in this process, maybe try to address them in this process. A lot of that's going to be happening at the same time. In terms of the work groups, since you phrase it as a work group, are those things where you're going to be maybe wanting commissioners to be also serving on potentially something else as a sort of a focus group sub-appointment kind of a thing, possibly?
That
Or have we not?
the sky is the limit, as they say. We're open to a variety of different possibilities, Mr. Chair, and I think, whether they are purely or essentially council agency, or they integrate other individuals like commissioners or others from outside of the council or from outside of council committees, is something that we're open to considering. Whether it's a separate group or something that's integrative, we do intend to come back to this commission and to other council committees on a pretty regular cadence this year and into next year as well. So there will be opportunities in this venue as well.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking of what Bob was saying with, have we learned ways to do this better? And that popped in my head is maybe if there's certain areas that some of us are more into than others, it might make sense to try to piece that off and give you more direct input to kind of limit how much needs to happen within our MPOSC meetings. Because also it's a big topic to come with. Here's the entire plan, all 9 of you discuss everything. That can get hard. So that might be one way that we can make that more efficient. Depending on what people's, it's a possible new time commitment for people. I don't know what's available, or even how those would function. Are those in-person meetings, or are they emails, or are they Zooms, or what? Something to consider. Yes, Emmett.
Chair, I'm just thinking out loud here, but we're open to the idea of holding like a workshop meeting where we could maybe break into smaller groups and talk about specific aspects of the plan that you could even self-select. Like, I'm really interested in the vision, or I really want to get into transportation planning, or regional bicycle transportation and regional trail coordination. Like, I think that the idea that we could really make some of these working meetings is something we're really up for. And your ideas would be welcome right now if you have them, or contacting me later.
I'd also be interested in hearing, probably by a contact later, if you kind of stew on this a little bit. Are there certain areas that you're either more passionate about or more knowledgeable about that you might want to focus on? Is that something that you'd be interested in, and what that might look like? This is basically brainstorming on the fly as we talk here. So you're getting my stream of consciousness. So give me feedback on what might work after you've thought about it for a couple of days.
Emmett, I have a question. Within all this magical plan, is there a part that talks about communication and kind of marketing? Because one of our problems is that people don't know about our parks and our programs. Somebody asked me the other day, so where are you going on Thursday? Oh, I'm on a regional park. What is a regional park? And I was, well, that's actually, and it took me a while to explain, and she's, I don't get it. Huh? So, find a way to make it, 7th grade and under, so we can say it really fast, and then, so people will know what we have and what it is and what is important. Because I know some people keep telling me, the Summit Avenue, and I don't think that's part of the regional program. I understand the problem, but I don't think we can do anything here. So is there a part that is gonna, work around, spreading the word or something like that?
That might be something that would be an entirely new chapter that we've never really discussed before. I'm sure Bob is sitting there going, I'm glad somebody else is saying this, because Bob talks about this all the time.
Right on.
Yes.
We talk about all the things that the implementing agencies do and how we fit into the pieces that they do. But we've kind of recognized that maybe there's a need for the council itself to do some sort of a coordination and marketing kind of role that hasn't existed, and we haven't described what that might be. We've occasionally asked for what kind of budget might be available, and you're told, well, maybe there's something, but council might be more willing to give us budget if we spelled out what it is we wanted to actually do. So that might be something that we consider adding a whole new chapter on about.
Also, we say I'm not an expert on that. I just see the problem.
Well, I think part of the problem is that none of us are real experts on it. We kind of see a need, but we don't know what to do about it. That's why it hasn't happened yet.
Well, the building of awareness of that the parks exist and where they exist and what we have is a big deal.
Yes.
And it's really an unmet need, and thanks for bringing it up.
I could talk at you for many, many minutes here, and that wouldn't help. I think it's a great point. It's something Bob and Monica, you've brought up. It's something that our Parks Ambassador Program and Amanda are working on. And for the first time ever this past year, she's been meeting with communications staff. But to really, in the agencies, convening like kind of a communications cohort. But the idea that we could deal with, like, talk about meeting people where they are, you know, what is a regional park? What is a regional park system? Like, it isn't something that people really know or understand, and maybe they don't need to, but let's talk about what would be important. Like, where are these opportunities? How do I get there? And what can I expect once I arrive? So this is an important topic, and one that I will have Amanda make us get into for, because she wants me to do it. And she wants this conversation to have with you. So we'll think about it and come back with it during the planning process.
Add me into your conversation, please.
I want to bring up, in terms of giving some policy level guidance and feedback, we have some significant unfinished business from previous rounds of this with respect to funding. And I just want to make sure that we have enough time blocked out to address those. We had two things that were left undone before. One is, I don't even remember which year it was now, 2016 or 18 or something. We did some stuff where we took a bunch of funding stuff out of the parks policy plan and said, we're going to come back to this later in some other form. That hasn't actually happened yet. So we've been going for 6-7 years without formal policy guidance on several funding aspects. There was some drafts that came to MPOSC that we had a bunch of feedback on and did not approve, and we never heard about it since. So we need to figure out where that stands and what needs to happen. And that was being presented as something outside of the parks policy plan, and maybe that is the way to do it. But since we haven't approved that yet, I just want to give you a heads up that I won't be comfortable moving a parks policy plan update to the council again until we have that addressed. Because if it's not addressed in something else, then it does need to be in the parks policy plan. So one way or another, that needs to get dealt with. The other was, we called out, there was a statutory change to the interest earnings account that used to be designated only to North Mississippi, I think, and now is to anything. And we said, we should come up with a plan for what we would do with that money, and we haven't done that yet. And that, maybe it goes into the parks policy plan, maybe it doesn't. Again, it's the sort of thing where we just want to make sure that we know what the answer to that is before we finalize the parks policy plan, so it has to go on the same kind of timeline. So I don't know that I have feedback on what the content of either of those would be, but just to make sure that it's on your radar of timeline. If you're just looking at the parks policy plan, it's going, scheduling out, we got to update this, 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 and this. It wouldn't necessarily be on your list, but those are some pretty big items in terms of how much time commitment it's going to be. Appreciate that. Anything else? Yes, Cecily.
What you just said triggered a couple of things in my mind. I think we're all very fond of and proud of the equity grant program that started, 2-3 years ago. So in this regional development guide, is that a place where we kind of cement it in the plan, or is it just subject to when there's funding?
That's also a good point.
Did that make sense?
And I'm not sure of this, but I think our parks policy plan might actually make mention of it very briefly, but not say a lot about it. And so maybe it's a fleshing out some pieces. I honestly don't remember, because there have only been 2 cycles, but we wanted to continue. I believe what's actually in there is a sentence saying, we intend to establish an equity grant program.
Okay.
And that might be all it says.
Okay.
So now we can say, yeah, we came up with something, here's some ideas, which parts need to be in policy and which are kind of logistics, could be separate.
You're right, it references it, but it's at a pretty high level.
Okay.
Thank you.
And And then the other thing, you mentioned if there was a way possibly for commissioners to be involved in any of these work groups. There are two that kind of interest me, but I had a question about one of them, number 7, the Regional Trails and Regional Bicycle Transportation Network. That seems to be the only one that's beyond MPOSC. The Regional Bicycle Transportation Network, is that normally housed under us, or is that under a transportation?
It's a little of both. It's been something that changed in just the last one, maybe the one before.
Okay.
If you go back further than that, it wasn't mentioned at all. In our previous update, we said, we've been talking about, we have some overlap with transportation stuff.
Right.
One of the low-hanging fruit things there was, okay, there's this whole thing that designated a regional bicycle transportation network for some federal reasons, and they said, let's at least acknowledge that on the map. I think that's pretty much all we did, is we put on the map, these are the ones that are also designated that way, and then we were open to more coordination of what that meant going forward, but I don't think we've gotten there yet. Is that about right?
That sounds about right, yeah. If I may, the Regional Parks Policy Plan currently talks about the need for additional coordination between the regional trails system as it is a part of the regional park system and the regional bicycle transportation network. Right now I kind of see it as two circles with a little bit of overlap, where there is some overlap between regional trails and the regional bicycle transportation network, but there's a lot of our regional trails that are not a part of the regional bicycle transportation network as well. So additional work to come in that space, to be sure.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, I'll just say that the park agencies have a keen interest in that coordination between the regional trail system and the regional bicycle transportation. Is that overstated, Scott? No. So that would be great to see.
Keen being a euphemism for financial? Yeah.
It is how work gets done.
Yes, Sue.
I just did a quick Google search. I'm aware of a couple of nationally designated days or organizationally designated days that focus on parks. The National Park Service has a National Parks Day, and there's a Kids to Parks Day that occurs on the 3rd Saturday of every May. And it kind of occurred to me that at some point, as far as marketing, it might be something to consider having a regional parks day each year.
Yeah.
And encourage folks, work with media, kind of highlight the parks and get folks out there. And maybe work with Met Transit and Metro Mobility to provide opportunities to get folks there that might not otherwise be able to get there. So, just a thought.
That on a very small scale for something a few years ago, and I don't remember what it was. I don't know if anyone else
It's a good idea.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah,
I think we did something.
Oh, I might be thinking of a local organization.
National Trails Day, National Park Day.
Yeah,
but
the Trails Day is, I think, first Saturday
in June. Yeah, I'm working on one in St. Paul.
Well, and autumn might be a good time to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's my favorite season, so I'll make the pitch.
Chair, I just wanted to mention, I don't want to get too excited or get you too excited, but next year will be the 50th anniversary of the regional park system.
Perfect.
So should we celebrate it
Perfect.
maybe with our first Regional Parks Day?
Perfect.
Yeah, that could be good.
Yeah.
But we got to do something.
Absolutely, proclamations and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and that right there especially is a very good opportunity for addressing do people know that there's a regional park system and what does that mean? How is that different from just, yes, our regional park implementing agencies operate things that are both regional and non-regional, and what's the difference?
Well, Mr. Chair, to counter my comment about wanting it in fall, maybe because next year is the 50th year, there ought to be some way of celebrating during each of the 4 seasons.
Now we're talking.
Highlight the winter sports and opportunities.
There you go, quadruple work for staff all in one sentence.
Right.
I love it.
Keep talking, Sue, you're
Yeah.
building this up.
Don't get me going.
The regional parks.
Yeah.
When was the last time that was updated?
They have had it.
A while?
Long time.
Okay.
We got to put that.
What Sandy is saying that probably wasn't picked up by the mic is that could be an opportunity to update our physical published map as well, because we've put some stuff online, but we haven't printed those in quite a while. That's a good point.
I'd like to just make one more point if I could.
Yeah.
And you all probably know this, read it, heard it on the radio, but when former Senator Dave Durenberger died a few weeks ago, we lost a real champion when it comes to our parks and trails.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many years ago it was, but I do remember being invited to attend a dinner where he was honored. And former original, very first Environmental Quality Board Chair Peter Gove spoke about Dave's legacy as it relates to the parks and trails, and it was just incredible. And you wouldn't have heard those words out of Dave's mouth because he was too humble. So it was good that somebody was up there giving him the credit due for that. And I just wanted to make note of that. We really did lose a hero.
Thanks. Coming back to just your broad values, I just want to point out that there's really good things on these two, the list of 4 for the core values and the regional vision. I like a lot of the stuff on there. I just want to point out that there's also going to be some significant work for us to figure out on some of those. We know we've been dealing with the equity question for a long time, and that's complicated, figuring our way out on there. The other I want to call attention to is, especially under accountability, where it mentions achieving measurable outcomes. When we start adding some of the other things into that, that's going to get harder because with equity, that's hard to measure outcomes on. Addressing climate resiliency is on our list again, and that's hard to measure outcomes on. And how we be, healthy, safe environment, we added that in, especially thinking about how our parks dealt with COVID. And we know a lot of things about that, but it's hard to measure those outcomes. So we heard about being data-driven for some things with Three Rivers and trying to figure out how can we measure and demonstrate what we're accomplishing. We might know we're doing good, but how do we know which things are doing the most good? And think a lot about how we measure outcomes for what we do on all these things that are a bit bigger picture. And some of the environmental stewardship things like, we got rid of some invasive species, we restored some species. That kind of stuff was easy to measure and was kind of some of the early things that we focused on. Now we're getting into some of the more people-focused stuff. That's trickier. So keep that in mind, and I appreciate it being on the list. Anything else? All right, well, thank you. And we'll move on to another that's very much related. Our next information item is still on the Regional Development Guide, talking about parks system and scenario planning. And you might have to tell us again what that means.
Oh, yeah. Well, good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners, Council Member. My name is Tracy Kinney, and I'm a Senior Planner in the Regional Parks Unit of Community Development here at the Council, and I am joined by Dan Markell, Planning Analyst in the Research Unit of Community Development as well. Brish Commish Dawes was going to join us today, but she fell sick. She will be back. She's unfortunately just out for the day. So we will go forward without her. So today we are going to be discussing an information item on scenario planning as related to the regional park system. Scenario planning is a new tool that the Council is using to develop the 2050 Regional Development Guide, including the Regional Parks Policy Plan and other Council plans and systems. This tool allows agencies to consider many different futures and the possibilities of those futures. So we'll get into that in just a bit, but first, here's the agenda. So the agenda for today's discussion includes a brief presentation on the scenario planning effort, including its purpose, the regional model, and its use in thinking about the regional park system. We will then have a group discussion about the possible effects that these scenarios will have on the, may have on the regional park system. And the intent of this information item is to have an initial high-level discussion about the effort. The goal is to build awareness of the effort. So by no means is this a comprehensive kind of presentation that you're going to have, deep conversation on. This is very high level. And we're really interested in getting your early insights here on some of these scenarios that we're going to present to you. Staff are going to return later to engage the commission on what can be done to prepare for these futures. So if you have any questions in the interim, please feel free to reach out to Barish, and she will be happy to assist with any questions. So now I'm going to hand it off to Dan to talk about scenario planning.
Thanks, Tracy. A little word about my substitution for Barish. You're losing some technical information by not having Barish here, but you're going to gain some conversational approach here. So this is meant to be a conversation. All that technical information is available. If we want to get into it, I'll share what I can and we'll get it back to you. But this is a high-level description, and it is something that we're using to contribute to the 2050 Regional Development Guide and all the different system plans and policy plans across the council. So we think it'll be very useful for all the different policy plans. We're having discussions similar to this with transportation and the water folks and the housing folks and everybody. So this is background work. I like the description earlier about the magical plans.
Right.
What I'm going to show you is some like behind the curtain, like how does the magic happen? So magician, I'm not a magician, so I feel comfortable telling that secret. The purpose of scenario planning generally is for us as a region to be able to explore the futures that might come. This is a very interesting time in history to look ahead 30 years to 2050 and think what's the region going to be like. We are required by state law to project what the growth is going to be in the region and where we think people are going to be living. When we started into this discussion, there was no unrest in the Ukraine, no conflict in there. We had a different federal administration. We didn't have a pandemic. I can keep going down the list, but uncertainty abounds, and that's the reality. Another reality is that we will, as a council, make one projection of the future. That'll be our official forecast. But a third part of it is we also need to be ready. What if that forecast isn't exactly right? What if we grow a little bit less, a little bit more? What if people choose to live like this and not like that? That's what scenario planning is trying to get. We're looking at a range of futures, so we're ready for those futures. Next slide. Give it a sheet. So I'm going to describe in 3 short slides 3 things. What's the logic framework of our exercise? How are we applying it to the region? And then how might it apply to parks? Super high level. The exercise starts by looking ahead and projecting what we call a business as usual scenario, one possible future. And in that future, we assume all the past recent trends just continue as they are into the future. Over the last 10 years, most of those trends are like 10-year trends. Over the last 10 years, we actually been developing more compactly than in previous decades. So we just assume the last 10 years is just going to continue. Then we think about all of those uncertainties that we're going to face. We don't even know what most of them are, but they will affect the region. And they affect the region in ways that we can actually respond to as the Met Council. There are things that we've always had to think about, and there are basically 2 of them. How much growth is there going to be? And where are people going to want to live and work? And so this chart that you see up on the slide puts business as usual right in the middle, and then the quadrants mix those 2 different variables. So on one corner we've got higher growth than business as usual, and that growth is more compact than it's been in the last 50 years. So we're growing a little bit more densely, a little bit more compactly. you can work your way around the clock there. Higher growth, more dispersed. The lower ones are lower growth dispersed and lower growth compact. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into it. But we're basically looking at those two issues. How much growth, where are people going to be? And we are talking about growth. Importantly, in all of our scenarios, we are presuming that the region will grow. We have a strong region. We have a growing region. Even in the worst of the growth scenarios, we're imagining that the region does continue to grow. What we haven't considered is a meteor strikes, downtown Excelsior, really dire scenarios. All the things we're showing, we've tested within the kind of reasonable boundaries of how we project growth. We think they're plausible. We think they're all possible. And we think that this shows a range of things that are potent. In other words, they push the region one way or another. So we feel pretty good about the logic framework. Next slide. Oh, on the next slide. When we take that logic framework and run it through our council tools, this is one of the first things that you start to see. What's the regional growth forecast look like, and where are people gonna live? Again, the 5 scenarios, business as usual up on the upper left. The green shows where there's more population. It has grown in those census tracts. And then the 4 scenarios are on the outside, on the right-hand side, are the things we're looking at applied to our growth forecasts. So if our region does go higher growth and more compact, you'll see a lot of green in the middle of the region. If it's higher growth and more dispersed, that green gets spread out into kind of a donut pattern. Now, interestingly enough, if you look on the upper right-hand corner, downtown Minneapolis and a lot of neighborhoods around Minneapolis and St. Paul actually continue to grow, even in a dispersed region. And that's just because we think there's enough demand for the kind of places that people could live there. And this is population. There's a similar set of maps for employment, but we're just using one today. So blob and donut for high, compact, and dispersed. The lower ones, they're kind of similar. It's just lower growth. Less intense blobs, less intense donuts. But so here's the range of things that we're looking at. Those are technical terms. There you go. So what happens when we think about this as it applies to regional parks? You can imagine in the upper right-hand image there, if there's a lot of growth, more on the edge of our region, there will be more pressure on the parks at the edge of the region. There will also be different kinds of pressure across the region. So parks in the center of the region, regional parks, they might have additional growth, but they might have more opportunity to do natural resource restoration. Where the parks on the edge might have more pressure to deal with the pressures of the bit. So I'm not getting into all the impacts of that. That's the coming process of what we're going to be doing. But it starts to apply itself to individual parks agencies, and then for this group, what does the regional parks policy plan have to include to make sure we're ready for all those futures? That's the simple version of it. Excellent. So a few takeaways, and then Tracy will take you into discussions. We do expect region-wide growth through 2050. Even in our most compact scenarios, all the parts of the region get growth. Even in the most dispersed scenarios, all parts of the region get growth. And each park agency is going to have to grapple with whatever comes in their own way with the pressures that appear. The challenges and opportunities will be different, and we need the council policy to be ready to support the agency work in that future. Sort of simple. Like I said, we're doing this kind of discussion across the different policy areas. And one of the things that we're engaged in right now is looking at more specifically at the impacts of those futures in the different systems. So the transportation people are looking at those futures and they're saying, what would this do to travel delay time? What would this do to accessibility? The sewer people are figuring out what would happen to our sewers. Do we have any hot spots where we're gonna have to replace sewers? Are there excess capacities in any places, in some of these places? So when we get all that stuff laid out on the table, we can look across the different systems and see what pressures come across the different regional systems in those different futures. And we can bring that information back to you guys to say, are there opportunities to align transportation with regional parks? Are there opportunities to align housing development with regional parks in some way? And that's the game we're playing over the next year and a half. We're in impacts analysis now to support the eventual goal of policy development. And that's the conversational version of scenario planning. I think Tracy has the next slide.
I am next. Thank you so much.
All right.
Oh, look at that. Okay. I'm just gonna lay them all out here. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Dan. So yeah, scenario planning is actually really cool. And I'm gonna just lay this out there for you today. So what can the scenario planning do for the regional park system? First off, it allows us to see these cross-cutting issues across the system, which is fun, because we're always focused on the regional park system. So this allows us to look outside the box a little bit more. And then we can have like that broader multi-sector view so that we can think about how the regions, we just did that preview of how the region's values and vision, we can see how that relates then to the regional park system. I also really love this because it allows us to serve our whole population better. It makes our policies more resilient because we're considering all these different futures. To Dan's point about these scenarios, we get all these things here. This diagram here is 5 different futures, okay? And these 5 different futures relate to these maps. So we're talking about all these different futures that could possibly happen. And in relation to the regional park system, then, it allows us to advance our priorities in different ways because we can then see how they cross-cut across the council system. So we've talked about natural resource protection, equity, geographic balance. How does that work in all these different possible futures, either together or separately? And then, finally, it helps us explore equity implications and policy trade-offs like adequate funding, system additions, and acquisitions. So to Dan's point about, what does it look like? What does it mean, for the agencies to, function in a higher growth, more dispersed environment as compared to a lower growth, more dispersed environment? That's a completely different kind of future, right? So today we're asking you some questions in relation to these scenarios. So we're going to turn to these questions and we're going to talk about these 5 futures, and we're talking about, so how would these futures affect the regional park system? And then what are some opportunities and concerns related to these different futures? So we kind of previewed a few of those. And then how could the regional park system be better prepared for these futures? So we're going to just open it up for conversations, but I just want to say once again, please connect with Brish. She's more than happy to fill in any gaps. And then staff is going to be back to talk to you about how we prepare for these futures. So here are the questions, and we'll pause for any thoughts on this.
All right, thank you. Initial feedback.
Emmett, didn't we did something like this online before? Or you send me to a group full of other people?
Chair, Commissioners, I can't remember that well what I did yesterday. So, I'm sorry, I don't know, but I think I have a vague memory of some sort of exercise we did.
We did some stuff with Post-it notes in one of our
Right.
meetings.
No, but it was in a virtual meeting, and then they sent it to breakout rooms, and it was, the water commission was there too, and transportation was there.
Yeah.
It was a bigger deal, right?
A meeting, but during our COVID time when meetings were remote,
Yes,
we had
yeah.
some breakout sessions.
Oh, yeah,
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 so-
you look better.
Well, I like it. Yeah.
Cecily.
So another type of thinking might be what I know Portland has done with their green belt, around the metro area, and the San Francisco Bay Area also did. And when I left, they kind of had a futurist scenario of having 2 million acres of protected land in that 9-county metro area. And I think they were at 1.25 million now. And just thinking in my mind about our 10 implementing agencies, we've got a great regional trail network that does connect different counties and different parks, whether they're city or state. But do we really have kind of a map of our regional parks and how they connect to other green areas? For people to be able to go park to park, or even wildlife corridors. So that's kind of another way to look at this, with regardless of where the growth happens, what do we need to get ready, for, really sustainable future. And
Some of that is actually shown on that print map that we were just talking about being out of date, in that I know it shows some state facilities, like state parks, state trails, and I think wildlife management areas, but don't quote me on that. And that informs a little bit of that.
But to take that and to kind of project to where we want to be in 2050, thank you, I'll have to look for that map again.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm sure every agency kind of has their plan with their master plan of potential acquisitions. But I don't know if they're really looking at potential acquisitions to relate to connecting to, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Jonathan, because you're here. But are they looking at what other agencies are doing and how these land masses of protected areas might connect?
Yes, Dan.
I'll respond to that because I think it's really an interesting question. And you have an actual mechanism to weigh in on that, the regional system plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some of our council systems, the impacts of these different quadrants are greater, they're more dire.
Mm-hmm.
In parks, there's an interesting phenomenon that you have a system plan which has yet to be completely built out. And so I think an interesting question for that system plan, depending on this quadrant, is would you favor developing more of those system elements in different places if one of those futures came about? That's a kind of policy question you could consider. The system plan gives you a game board to apply to this logic framework or vice versa. And then you can, and so the ingredients are here for a really, what I think the academics would call a juicy discussion. So I think it's I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out in parks.
Yes, Bob.
Just building on that idea, the search corridor map, which lays out some of that kind of thinking and the kind of saying that maybe we need another park system in various corridors based on the search corridor, is one thing that perhaps we could tie into the scenarios that you're doing so that we could have a search corridor concept that aligns with the search or the quadrants. Somehow just using the various stuff to say, well, okay, if A happens, what does that mean in terms of our search corridor? Do we need to juice it up or whatever?
Chair, Commissioners, I will add, you could play that same game with programming. And should there be support for programming that's different in the different futures? We heard earlier that was a kind of new frontier that the council, has sort of put one toe into, but I'm sure the agencies are would be very interested in that discussion.
Yes, Bob?
One more comment. It would seem to me that as we get in this sort of growth scenario system, that understanding the demographics of 2050 and what the demographic outcomes might be of that growth will also be very informational to us, both in terms of accessibility as well as programming.
To answer, more specific your questions here, what I see is, we're looking at the growth population pretty much and where they're gonna be. So in the top ones, the higher growth with, either more or disperse of compact, I think both ends we're gonna ended up overusing our green spaces or our regional parks. So what I think we should do there is having big investments. So, you have to protect more the trees, you have to clean up more often, you have to make sure that the park is still working, or you will have to build maybe a different park or more programming, and that stop a scenario. And then the bottom on the other side, I will think if we don't have a really high growth, then we can try to recycling programming or reuse things or cut certain budget because we're not going to see so much use in our parks. So we can invest those parts in other programs. And then, on the sides, I would say, if it's compact, in my opinion, it will be easier to control because you just have this area here and this area here, and then everything else will be just fine, right? Magically fine. But if it's dispersed, that will be a big deal because then we will have to, get more help from other entities or other programming or other like transportation and water, because it's different when you have to deal with a city that is dispersing densely everywhere. So in my experience, living in a high density, super dispersed city like Mexico City, it ended up having no green areas around it because, the city takes over everything, and then you kind of have to protect really small, I will call it pocket parks, even when it's just, regional parks, and then protect the areas around it. But so to prepare, in my opinion, I think we have to prepare for the worst scenario that was going to affect the quality of life the worst. So if we have that prepared, then the other ones will be like, we can just work on this part. But I do like, and I like the programming. I think I'm pretty much sure you use a computer program to tell you, so we have all these people destroying this city over here. Just, no? If you want, I will volunteer to play the game. So it's pretty training. Yeah, and I like the research. I think it's very cool and really trying to see in the future. That's always important.
So a big thing that comes up for me when we're looking at the dispersed versus compact is that in terms of how it relates to regional parks, who might be more important than how many? And particularly think about that with respect to equity concerns. Because of course, parks are land, so they need space. And so what we have right now is a system where there are some very old parks in the city core from some good planning many, many years ago. And then we have a bunch of parks that are on the periphery, and as Jonathan has pointed out, not a lot in between. It's like Cecily and Bob and I are in kind of that donut development area, which is very white and relatively wealthy. And so if we get donut development or donut population growth, is that going to be more relatively white, relatively wealthy people settling out there because, especially now post-pandemic, more of them can work from home. They don't have to commute into the city. They just have the flexibility to be there. And so now we have maybe more usage of those parks, but it's actually making our equity numbers worse. Or are we changing some things about what housing exists in those areas, what employment exists in those areas, what transportation exists in those areas, so that a donut development might make the equity situation better and bring people that used to have to live in the city core out to some of those neighborhoods that then are closer to some of the more far-flung parks. And so I think that's where it really ties into this being, the parks policy plan is part of the overall regional development guide, because the housing stuff, the transportation stuff, the employment stuff is going to make a huge difference on that if we go to a more donut-y kind of growth. If it's more compact, then we have basically the same problems we do now of, there's no transportation out to these faraway things, and that's probably going to be the biggest thing that we've been talking about. But if we get into more of a donut-y thing, that has potentially more stuff that could change, which means both more things to worry about, but also more opportunities for maybe the Met Council has ways of making that better. I don't know how we influence the things of housing and employment location. That's somebody else's wheelhouse, but I know that they do. So that's the main thing I'm thinking about. If my neighborhood grows and it's just more people like me that are able to work from home more, that's going to make some of our perk equity numbers worse. But if it's hey, now we have the opportunity to say maybe people want to be close to their jobs in different ways, so put more jobs out further instead of concentrating everything in a city core. That could change everything.
Well, and besides that, the age will also change, because as the age of the population they are older, most older people likes to live close of hospital resources. So they're gonna move back in, or they're gonna move back in certain places where they have all the services. And I don't know how many kids are gonna, be around. We could end up like in Latin America, that is a growing population constantly, or like in Europe, that is all decreasing because there aren't that many kids. Oh, that's what they say. I don't know.
And that raises some interesting notes about housing in particular, stuff that I've heard about, and I don't know how far along we are into this process, but we've got the baby boomer generation that were able to buy housing at relatively cheap prices, and then have been able to add on through good years and things like that. So now there's relatively large houses that cost a lot that are no longer affordable for the coming generations, mine and the one behind it. So we have some of the older generations retiring and wanting to sell their homes, but not having resident buyers available because that generation can't afford it. It's either they have to take a massive loss on the house and sell for less than they wanted to, or they end up selling to corporations that are going to rent them out. And so what does that do with the parts of our housing stock of the retirements and maybe moving out of those? It's not turning over the way it naturally used to, because there's these disconnects in available financing.
And to make it more complicated, then you can add the different cultural background, because in my family, if I put my mom in a retirement place, nobody will ever talk to me, even when I know she will be happy there. But it's like that's not ever happen.
Yeah.
So it all depends. So it depends how the cultures know how they grow and how. So yeah, good luck.
Well, and both of you raise good points. I think of my nieces and nephews, for example. They're all late 20s, early 30s. They would never want to live in the house they were raised in. They don't want to be out in the suburbs. They want to be in the inner city where there are things to do. They may not even want a car. They may use a zip car or bike everywhere. And they have good jobs. They have good incomes, but they're making different choices. They don't want to live out in the boonies. They want to live in the inner city. So that's another demographic thing with some, I guess that's millennials. Yeah.
I would think, Tess, you bring that point of view in terms
Oh,
of
wow, yeah.
that whole area down there in terms of that mentality.
I love living in the inner city. I will say I am thinking about purchasing a home, and it's really tricky because inner city housing costs are really, really high right now.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to be living in South Minneapolis is, kind of the area where everyone wants to be. And I would say I have different communities that are of the BIPOC community that do live in the suburbs too, because the cost of living is a little bit cheaper out there. And so, I don't know, like, it's interesting to hear all of these different scenarios because I think all of them essentially are valid and could be real possibilities. I would say the donut seems most likely to be, but something that, as we're kind of talking about, and everybody is bringing up questions that I have had already, but the looking into habitat conservation is something that feels really important for me. I think living in other countries and having those experiences, trying to be really adamant about maintaining those spaces, especially here in the Midwest, we're such a, we are this state alone, how many different species of birds migrate from South America, Central and South America to Canada and further up. And so I think that for me, that's a huge intention with a lot of this work about creating those byways for wildlife. And then I think with that, you can create education about why we're maintaining these spaces for wildlife, and that goes to programming and really opening the community, and that could even be a part of the website about this is why we're doing this new project here, because these are the things that we're thinking about for the future, not just within the community, but bigger pictures. So I think that's something that kind of stands out for me as important.
Thank you.
Sue.
This may have already been addressed while I was out of the room, and I apologize for that, but as it relates to the regional park system and the council as a whole, I think native species needs to be a part of the conversation. I had coffee with a couple of friends earlier today, and one of them has been reading a book about the need for more native species in order to sustain our insect populations. And as someone who grew up being deathly afraid of a lot of those insects, it was really an eye-opening conversation because she talked about the impact on birds. And it's, when we think about native species, native plants, I don't know what they all are. I know a bit about native species, but I don't know as much about native plants. And I think that's true of a lot of us. And we're putting in lovely landscaping, perhaps, A, overwatering them, but B, putting in plants that don't sustain those insects and ultimately have an impact on the bird life. So I think there's a lot we can do in terms of the resource education standpoint. And I don't know if that fits into the conversation you're having, but I think it's worth consideration.
Okay. One other thought I had is, we were talking about scenario planning in terms of a lot of demographics and the growth stuff. I'm also wondering about more of the sort of political scenarios and whether we're addressing those impacts in terms of things like, are our funding sources going to be expanded or expire or modified, anything like that? Is the scope of our responsibility going to stay the same or be expanded or reduced? Are there any other things like that we might be watching for, either from like legislation or our the way that we relate to not only our own implementing agencies, but also the other thing I'm thinking about, we've got this nice little line of what our 7-county metro is, but of course there are people outside of that ring and park agencies outside of that ring. And the more we grow, the more that those start to interact with us and matter. And do we need to worry about any scenarios for what that means? Is there something that we should be doing more coordination on, anything with those neighboring populations and agencies? How does any of that stuff look like? So this is more political and policy scenarios and what those impacts might be on us in terms of responsibilities, funding, and how we operate. And of course, anything can happen. Good luck forecasting it. But it might be worth pinpointing, are there any that seem like they might come up more than others that we should be thinking about?
I think during the virtual conversation, which I do remember was in summertime, everybody was 100% Minnesota was gonna be one of the biggest migration because the climate change. It's funny that now in winter nobody thinks it. But I mean, migration is something else, so.
I don't know.
Immigration, migration.
But we have water here. People might move here for our water.
Well, yeah, that was, I think it was the water and it was, the climate, the global warming that the seas level were gonna high. Oh, yes.
And I wouldn't say nobody either, because I have some sled dog friends in southern Wisconsin who have gone most of the season without snow and are thinking, maybe I should move to Minnesota. You guys still have snow.
Oh, don't me. I moved here, so yeah. Yeah, no, but I agree, yes.
Okay. Anything else? All right, well, thank you. I'm sure we'll hear more.
Thank you very much. This is a rich discussion. Yeah, thanks.
Juicy, I think that was the word. Juicy.
All right, that brings us on to the reports portion of our meeting. I have a couple of things. One would be point out, yeah, our little white noise generator is turned off. Usually we're able to wrap up around 6 and have 2-hour meetings. However, the Parks Policy Plan updates tend to be the exception to that. We often have had longer meetings for that. So I'm interested to hear thoughts, as you might think of them, of how we can use our meeting time efficiently over the next 2 years when we're talking about Parks Policy Plan things. Is there anything we could do differently? Is there stuff that maybe we should have as homework rather than in meetings? Or otherwise, just be prepared for possibly some longer meetings. And I know that doesn't necessarily work out very well for some of our members. So the more we can try to fit it in, the better. That would be something to be aware of going forward. Second thing is, as Jeremy had mentioned previously, the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund constitutional amendment is due to expire relatively soon. That has to get legislative action to get on the ballot for a possible renewal, either this year or next year. So this legislature, the 2-year. I see there are bills that have been introduced, but in neither the House nor the Senate has any of them moved out of committee yet. So something to be keeping an eye on. I don't know if they're actually going to take action on that this year or if they're going to save it for next year. But certainly that's something to keep in touch with your legislators about. That's a pretty big deal, not only for us, but also for the state park systems and the greater Minnesota regional park systems. And finally, we do have actually 2 vacancies on the commission right now for District H, which was Todd, and for District E, that was Jeremy. There were some political things that came up, so he unfortunately was not able to be reappointed for another term. So we have those 2. If you know anybody at all that you can go lean on, the way that we usually get people to apply for these is if somebody approaches them personally and says, hey, I think you'd be good for this, please consider it. So if you know anybody, go talk to them, have them contact myself or Emmett to find out more details about both what our responsibilities are and what the process is like. But I really want to make sure that we get those filled when we're talking about Parks Policy Plan updates. It would be really helpful to have that full representation. So I don't want to go through the next 2 years without those districts represented. So if you know anybody, please talk to them.
What are the districts again? I'm sorry.
E and H. Right?
Yeah. That's exactly right.
And there's a map of what those districts are available on our website. So if anyone wants to go figure out exactly what those entail, they are there. Or just call us and be like, here's my address. Where do I live? We could figure it out for you. Any other commissioner reports? Yes, Cecily.
Yeah, on Tuesday was the final TAC meeting for the Middle St. Croix Regional Trail. Pretty exciting. You know, they have a kind of a near final alignment out of the many, they called it spaghetti, the many options over here, over there. You know, do you do it at the river, looking at the river, not even seeing the river? I'm not quite sure when they'll be bringing that master plan here. Yeah. Probably for a while yet, but anyhow.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Liaisons? Anything for us?
It's my understanding that the governor will be making decisions that will be announced tomorrow as to the appointments and reappointments to the Met Council. So I may see you in April. Or not.
All right. Well, and I suppose I should also mention in terms of our appointments and the vacancies, also we had Cecily and Anthony Taylor, rather, mixing your names, appointed to new terms with us as well. Staff.
Just very quickly, this legislative session is, in my limited experience, the busiest legislative session I've ever been involved with. There's just a lot going on. Recently, I think maybe it was yesterday, two of the governor's proposals moved through committee. One was the governor's recommendation to increase our operations and maintenance funding by about $2.5 million each year, from 10 to 12.5 million, by increasing the general fund contribution. So that was really exciting. Additionally, the governor has a modernization of regional parks and trails proposal. It's one-time funding for helping with climate resilience and actually just dealing with the impacts of the pandemic and that incredible use that happened during that time. That and the council is committed to matching that funding. So it would be a $12 million one-time state bond matched with $8 million in regional funds. So there's also a proposal for bonding out there. There's a number of numbers, I won't even talk about them. And then this is a Parks and Trails Legacy year, and the governor's recommendation is that that funding be split between DNR, us, and Greater Minnesota in a 40%, 20%. We would be the 40% recipient, DNR 40%, Greater Minnesota 20%. So that looks like that's moving forward too. There's bills in both the House and Senate for that. That's what I know, but it's an exciting time.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I think we're ready to adjourn. Thank you.
Tess, the skyways are locked, so we're gonna walk over together.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Secret,
Yeah,
secret passage.
Whatever happens, yeah.
Hey, I understood it.
Yes.
Really?
It should be on both.
Thanks, Jonathan, for coming. That was a great presentation.
Oh, there's two different ones?
Yeah.
4305, 11.
Okay, sorry.
I thought they were this one.
You have anything on that?
That's okay.
Should update one.
Yes, that's the one I had. Then
Okay.
I wrote down and then I noticed the other one was different and I was like,
Yeah.
I can't remember.
If it was any